Okay, I think that's my cue. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our last webinar session with Baker Tilly. For those that don't know me, my name is Darla Price, and I am the Executive Director for the Northumberland Manufacturers Association. I always say we are a small but mighty organization out here in what they consider rural Ontario. And very proud that we get the ability to work with organizations such as Baker Tilly to support our industry as a whole. I've had the privilege of working with multiple representatives at Baker Tilly, and whether it's that local guy here in town or accessing their executive across Ontario to today now meeting their European team. I think what makes Baker Tilly so different is that we have this ability, and they're very open with tying us into their worldwide network. And everybody at Baker Tilly, it doesn't matter what time zone you're in or what office you're sitting in, they've all got that same goal. And that is to ensure we continue as an industry to be high performers. So really proud. I'd like to thank the European team. I know time zones are probably a little crazy and the whole bit, but we really appreciate you being here this morning and sharing with us your expertise and greatness here with us in Canada. So thank you so much for your time and effort. I'm sad this is our last session. I feel like, oh, can we tap into more countries? Where else is Baker Tilly in the world that we can bring in? But thank you so much. I will now pass it over to Sean Grant Young from Baker Tilly, and he'll get the session started. Thank you.
Perfect. Yes, it's not the end, Darla. It's only the beginning. For the record, 143 countries, so we could do years and years of webinars. Thank you for joining, everybody. Third week. Appreciate everybody jumping on this morning. We're going to talk about doing business in Europe, hitting on three of the major markets: Ireland, the United Kingdom, and the Netherlands. And we're going to start off with our colleagues in Ireland.
Perfect. Thanks, Sean. I am currently sitting in Rome on leave, so I'll try not to make it too obvious that I'm rushing through for a glass of wine, but I will try to keep up the charade that I'm doing a full presentation here. I'm joined by one of my colleagues, Aaron Gallagher, who's a tax manager on my team. I head up the tax department for Baker Tilly Ireland. And Aaron will stay on as well for the Q&A at the end, just in case there's anything anybody would like to ask. But I think we'll just quickly move on to the next slide, just to give you a small bit of a background about Baker Tilly Ireland. We merged last July with the UK Baker Tilly firm, so it's good to have my colleagues, not just my network colleagues, but my actual colleagues from the firm, MHA, with me on this call as well. So we now have two offices in Ireland in the two major cities, Cork and Dublin, but we are part of the wider MHA team, which is 150 partners strong across 23 offices, both in the UK and Ireland. And I'm sure the guys will attest to the strength of the MHA firm as well after me. I won't bore you with the next slide for too long, because if you've sat through three of these, you'll know the strength of the Baker Tilly International Network. So all I can say is we're delighted to be here with our colleagues from Canada and also the Netherlands, and as I said, our UK colleagues as well. So I won't bore you with that slide. I'm sure you've seen it before from our Canadian colleagues. I'll just start, I suppose, with a bit of a backdrop to Ireland from an economic perspective and why companies do come to Ireland, and then I'm going to let Aaron do a little bit more the technical side of the tax advantages, which is the way this work. I like to do the soft, easy part, and Aaron likes to do the hard technical part. That's how I operate. I suppose from an Irish perspective, since Brexit, we do play on the fact that, and my UK colleagues mightn't like me saying this, but since Brexit, we do play on the fact that we are the only native English member of the EU, English speaking member of the EU, and also we're a member of the euro currency. So I suppose we use that to our advantage for companies from especially the likes of Canada and America, where we can say we're the springboard and gateway to Europe and to operating across the EU. we're that nice stopping stone on the way into Europe. We're a committed member of the EU, and we really are, I suppose, looking to keep our kind of tax landscape being seen as stable and robust by taking on a lot of the EU added changes and a lot of the OECD BEPS changes. So we really have shown that we're both committed to the EU tax reform, to the EU on a long-term basis, and to global tax reform, both in the EU and as OECD level. Our strong FDI record is clear to see. We're home to 160,000 global international groups. Our real, I suppose, strength is the fact that, I think it's looking at over 50% of our payroll tax take comes from FDI and from global international groups. So we do feel like we have a really strong FDI record, one of the top in Europe. That in turn has led to a really skilled workforce, but domestically we have a great education base, but we also, with the amount of global companies we have coming in, we get a really strong workforce coming into the country, and it allows people within the manufacturing and technology sectors to move from company to company. And we do have, I suppose, real strong political stability, which is something that in today's world we're very proud of, the fact that we haven't ever leaned too far left or too far right since the formation of our state back in the 1920s. We've been led by one of the two main parties in Ireland who are both centre-right, but very much centre parties. Both of those parties currently form a government together, as they did in the last term as well. So we do have that strong political stability as well. So I suppose that's just a little bit of the economic factors that shows why Ireland is a good place to do business. If we move on to the next slide, just to follow on from that, I suppose looking at our current strength in the market. So our GDP is currently running at about 3.3%. That's going to drop to about 2% next year, expected to, which is in line with what I suppose the global average is looking at, and it's probably just slightly ahead of the EU average, which shows the strength of where the Irish market is right now. We're still performing very well, even in these current times of maybe a bit of fluctuation on growth. Interest rates are falling, which we're glad to see. Our inflation has really steadied off over the last 18 months. It's currently running at about 1.7% and cooling further down to about 1.5%, which is a great place for us to be. A lot of countries, obviously the inflation is skyrocketing, and when you go back 18 months ago, we looked like we probably were going to be in that sort of region as well, but we really have managed to curtail it in recent times, and that cooling off is very good for us to say. Unemployment, we're effectively at full employment in the country. Our unemployment rate is just around 4% at the moment, so always expected to be even at full employment around the 3 to 4%. So as I say, it's a really good sign of our workforce that we have almost full employment. And there is a current surge in infrastructure spending. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that at the end again, because we have a budget coming up in 2 weeks, and it's going to be really focused on infrastructure spending, because we really feel like that's where we now need to lead the country forward. And we're looking at pumping a 2 billion euro budget into infrastructure spending in the country to help firms come into Ireland and grow in Ireland. On that, then, when it actually comes to the stage of setting up and moving into Ireland, I'll let Aaron jump in around the practicalities of getting yourself established in Ireland.
Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you're dialing in from. As Brendan mentioned, my name is Aaron Gallagher. I work alongside Brendan on the tax desk in Ireland. Just in terms of incorporating a company in Ireland and adding on to what Brendan was speaking about, incorporating a company in Ireland, it is a relatively straightforward process. In most cases, that can be completed in about 1 week time. I suppose the main key requirement we see for incorporation of a company is the requirement to have at least one director who's either an EU or an EEA resident director. I suppose where that's not possible, another option there is to put an insurance bond in place. Then I suppose from a tax perspective, it's important to consider both the tax residency and the substance requirements. The Irish tax authorities, they look closely at where central management and control is exercised from. So the simple registration of a company in Ireland may not be enough to support general tax residency and substance. It kind of falls in line with where your board of directors are mainly resident. In certain situations where we see an incorporated company with resident directors in another jurisdiction, it does leave open the possibility to that jurisdiction's tax authorities arguing central management and control is exercised from outside of Ireland. So that can be a concern. I suppose the other important thing to consider there is that the board of directors residency position isn't the only thing the Irish tax authorities would look at. They'd look at a range of other points in terms of where the board meetings are held, where company policy is decided from, where major contracts are negotiated from as well. Moving on to the tax registration then for a company. Again, just on the previous slide there, please. The tax registration, again, it's a relatively straightforward process that can be completed in around 1 to 2 weeks, with the exception of a VAT registration. So that would include this corporation tax and employers payroll registration, which can be relatively straightforward. However, we have seen in recent times a VAT registration taking sometimes up to 6 weeks. So that can be a little bit of a more onerous task. The next point to consider then is the setting up of a bank account in Ireland. It's one of the more practical challenges in terms of an anti-AML requirements and having a resident director in the company to actually set up that account. So that can be a kind of tedious process.
Yeah, I think there to summarize, Aaron, it's probably a case that Ireland has very much moved away from any type of PO box regime anymore, and it very much is that we're trying to show that we're best in class. We have been heavily involved in the anti-avoidance measures brought out internationally. So the Irish authorities are very much looking at where is the real central management and control. So even though you can set up a company very easily with an EU director, they will look at where the managing control of the company is to see as a resident in Ireland, and also that substance point to really get to be able to demonstrate that profits should sit in Ireland and be taxable in Ireland. The authorities really want to see some boots on the ground as such, and really an actual presence in Ireland, and that falls in line with what you mentioned on the VAT registration as well. The VAT registration, they're really looking at evidence of a VAT establishment in the country to allow that registration be processed, because they have a worry that those companies that have no presence in Ireland perhaps getting an Irish VAT registration and using it to zero rate across Europe. And again, off the back of Brexit, that was probably something that really came to light, that there was perhaps UK companies setting up in Ireland with no real physical presence just to get that EU-wide VAT registration. So it's become a bit of an onerous task for us, but if we have all the facts and details right, then we can get it over the line. It's not a problem. It just takes a bit of time, and just to make everybody aware of it.
And just on to the next slide there, please. So in terms of Ireland's tax regime, I suppose our headline rate is our corporation tax rate is one of the lowest in Europe at 12.5% on trading profits. Passive income for companies then is subject to the higher rate of tax at 25%. But I suppose our low corporation tax rate is a strong selling point for us across Europe. Another important factor is that Ireland has signed up to the Pillar 2 OECD guidelines for periods commencing on or after 1 January 2024, which does apply a minimum 15% effective rate for large multinationals exceeding 750 million euro in turnover. From January 2025, Ireland do have a participation exemption on dividends received since 1 January 2025. This aligns with Ireland with other EU jurisdictions and enhances our our holding company location. We also have an R&D tax credit in place for companies. It's a 30% repayable R&D tax credit for periods commencing on or after 1 January 2024. We also have a knowledge development box system in place, which effectively reduces your tax rate to 10% on certain IP related income. We also have capital allowances available on intellectual property. Businesses can essentially write off the cost of acquiring or develop an IP against their taxable profits. Another important point is that we do have one of the lowest rates of employers' social security at a rate of around 11.25%. And we have also other BEPS measures in place, including CFC rules, anti-hybrid measures, exit tax provisions, and interest limitation rules.
I always enjoy our exit tax provisions because we previously had exit tax provisions that gave rise to an exit charge of 33%, which is our capital gains tax rate. But the way we brought in the exit tax provisions under the OECD BEPS rules meant that we actually can use a rate of 12.5% as our exit tax. So even though we looked like we were bringing in the anti-avoidance measures within the OECD BEPS project, we actually ended up in a better place because we ended up with an exit charge of 12.5% rather than 33%. So it was a nice add-in for us to be able to do and say we included the exit tax provisions as was lined out in the guidelines, but it actually left companies in a better position. But I think as you mentioned there, Aaron, it's probably twofold on why Ireland is such a good place. From a tax perspective, you've got that holding company regime where you've got participation exemption on dividends, and you've got participation exemption from gains on sales of subsidiaries as well. And that's across all the countries that we have treaty with, which is almost 80 countries. It's a great place for IP because you've got that knowledge development box system, which is like an IP box system, which allows you a 10% corporate tax rate. You've got that capital allowances on the IP that's acquired as well, and you've got that R&D, which effectively is a cash refund. The R&D, the way it's mechanics of it now, allows you an actual real refund of tax paid. So it's a real, I suppose, home for both holding company regimes and for your IP and development companies as well. I'll let you jump on to the next slide, maybe, Aaron, again. Yeah.
Yep. Other important factors of Ireland's tax regime, we do have SARP relief available for inbound secondees, which is effectively reduces the Irish income tax burden for high earners in inbound secondees, making Ireland more attractive for international talent transfers. We also have a foreign earnings deduction credit for outbound secondees, which provides an income tax deduction for Irish resident employees who spend significant time working abroad in certain countries. We also have a keep share award scheme generally for SMEs, which offers tax efficient share awards for key employees. Another important relief available is we do have corporation tax startup relief as well, which is effectively a relief for CT in the first 5 years of trading. It's linked to the number of employees, and it's also linked to your employer's social security that's paid per employee. And finally, one other very important factor for considering Ireland as a location for doing business is that we have an extensive double tax treaty network. Currently at the moment we have 75 signed, and we have 3 in progress, which can obviously reduce the burden on companies in terms of lowering withholding tax rate on dividends, royalties and interest.
Perfect. I think if I was critical of ourselves probably on any of those kind of tax advantages we're talking about, it's probably the share award one. I think it's something we as a country probably need to have a better mechanism around rewarding employees. The keep scheme that Aaron mentions tries to achieve what we want. It tries to make sure that gains are seen as capital gains tax for share awards, but it's kind of onerous in practice. It's a very heavy piece of legislation. Pickup on it has been very slow because it's a costly piece of legislation to implement. So a lot of companies end up just using straightforward, unapproved share awards, which basically lead to an income tax hit on employees, and Ireland's income tax, which I mentioned later, is relatively penal, at a relatively penal rate. So that's probably one area we could certainly do it improving. But I'm going to move on now and just talk maybe a little bit more around I suppose, the economic part, and just to show the strength of how Ireland has been doing in the past few years. So the numbers really speak for themselves. So I probably don't have to say an awful lot about this slide, but as you can see, over the past 5 years, our exchequer figures, so the actual tax receipts for the country, have really grown significantly, almost doubled in a 5-year period. And even in 2025, we have the numbers to the end of August, and again, they're ahead of prior year. So that current upward trajectory is continuing. I suppose the real strength and the real driver behind that is our corporate tax receipts. And last year in 2024, we almost broke 40 billion on corporate tax receipts. Now, that did include a famous case around a tech company that I won't need to name, but that wasn't the full driver of that, because those receipts actually were split over a number of years. So even without that money, we would have still been over 30 billion on corporate tax receipts. And when you even go back further on a graph like this, you'll see that in kind of 2014, 2015, Ireland's corporate tax receipts were only at about 4 billion. So we've increased tenfold over the course of 10 years. And again, in 2025, even with the current worry about stability from an FDI perspective, our corporate tax receipts are still running ahead of the same period in the prior year. So we're at 18 billion up to the end of August, which really shows the strength, I suppose, of, as I say, the FDI in Ireland, that investment to grow in Ireland, and why companies are here. There's that strong track record. So thought that was just worth sharing and looking at. And then what I'll move on, I think it'll be good again from an economic perspective, just to look at the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats for Ireland as a market, which is just in my next and last slide. So the strengths, obviously, as I mentioned, we've got a strong FDI record. We have that skilled workforce here from that FDI that comes into the country, and we have that robust corporate tax regime. Because of the fact that we're willing to insert all the anti-avoidance, we allow that to make us stand firmly behind our 12.5% rate. And we've always reiterated that our 12.5% rate is not in question, and that will remain a key point of our corporate tax regime. Political stability I've mentioned, so I won't go back over that. But I suppose these strengths do have weaknesses, and the major weakness for us is perhaps that over-reliance on some multinationals. Over 80% of our corporate tax receipts comes from multinationals. Over 50%, almost 60% of our corporate tax receipts come from 10 taxpayers, which, when you look at it, is a very small window, and it is a risky strategy for us to have that reliance on a small number of companies. Even this year, on a month-to-month basis, we could see in July that our corporate tax receipts were down significantly. In August, they were up significantly on prior year, and that was all to do with one pharma company, Pfizer, making a payment at a different time of year in 25 to 24. So to see one company having that benefit or that impact on the receipts is a scary sign for us as a country. Infrastructure, I mentioned, it's a weakness, but it's also really, I suppose, an opportunity for us as well. We do need significant investment in housing in the country. We need a lot of investment in our grid and in water. That is happening. The surpluses we have had in each budget are being reinvested into infrastructure, and especially this year, as I mentioned, we have a budget coming up in 2 weeks. It was a 10 billion spend announced in the budget, 2 billion of which is specifically for infrastructure projects. So it's something we need to fix. I suppose there's no growth without investment, and I think our government are seeing that there needs to be an investment into infrastructure to allow the companies that are already here to expand and grow, and help that continue FDI coming into the country, that they know it's not just a strong tax regime. We actually have the infrastructure to allow you set up in Ireland and to operate here. I said financing is one of our weaknesses. We have a great government body called the IDA, who'll help inbound companies looking to set up in Ireland, and they're definitely worth an introduction if you're thinking of moving into Ireland. We'd be delighted to introduce any company to the IDA. They do give grants and they give assistance on looking at places to set up in the country and make good introductions. But I do think financing is probably a weakness. We don't really have any kind of good short-term cheap financing. You do have to go to your pillar banks or your alternative lenders. So that is something that we would always be recommending, that perhaps that IDA network should look at providing financing to companies looking to move into Ireland. The income tax regime I mentioned, we have the highest rate of income tax being 53% of the country. You enter that very quickly. You enter that at a wage of about €70,000. So it is quite a steep penal income tax regime. But again, some of the things that Aaron mentioned, like SARP, do help inbound secondees to lower that effective income tax rate. I think the opportunities and threats, we've probably covered a lot of the opportunities with the budget coming up. We do have the EU presidency next year, which is always great to have for a smaller nation, especially to move away from things like Pillar 1, where you could be looking at global consolidated tax base, where you tax companies based on where the consumers are. A small nation like Ireland with 5 million of a population don't want that. We want the tax to be incurred where the substance and the real work is carried out, which is the strong point of our robust corporate tax regime. Opportunity for us in the digital economy, given all the tech companies we have here. I certainly think we need to be putting more investment into that area. And then the threats for us, I suppose I couldn't finish without mentioning the word tariffs. And as an audience in Canada, I suppose you'll sympathise with us that it's been such uncertainty over the last while. We've seen a lot of Irish companies, I suppose, forward putting almost stockpiling in the US in the early part of the year, which really skewed our export figures this year. But I think thankfully we seem to have some level of certainty around it now, and I think that's good news. I suppose we can only work with what we have on the table right in front of us, and given that we do have some certainty, certainly helps a lot of the international companies we're talking to at least make some plans into the future around their supply chain and their budgeting and forecasting. So I think that's really it from the Irish side. I suppose hopefully that was a good snapshot of both the economic and the tax position and the strengths of Ireland. And hopefully if any of you are thinking of looking at a move into Europe, you'll consider Ireland. But I think I'm going to hand over now to my colleagues in the UK firm, which is Bev, Alison, and Sean, I think, or Matt, sorry.
Thanks so much, Brendan. Enjoy the wine, and thank you for the introduction to Ireland. And now to our UK folks. Thank you, Beverly, Alison, and Matt.
Thanks, guys. Well, Ireland's a difficult act to follow. I kind of wish we'd have asked to go first. Listening to Brendan with all his wonderful reliefs and incentives, and we do have plenty in the UK, but I think the position in the UK at the moment is probably just a little bit different. Inflation's kind of stubbornly holding at around 3.8% was the last time we had an announcement earlier this month. Interest rates holding at around 4%. We are expected to see forecasting a growth of about 1.2% on GDP this year, but that is quite low. I think I heard a remark today to say that it's one of the fastest growing in the G7, but I don't think it's a great deal to shout home about being 1.2%, but there we go. But having said that, we do still have, I think one of the things we have in our favour, Alison, Matt, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but my view is we have quite a stable tax structure, and therefore that creates an element of stability and certainty when people are investing into the UK. Our tax system, while we've had a few little ups and downs from a corporate tax perspective in particular, it's remained stable for quite a few years now. And I think with the recent changes in government, when we've had a corporation tax roadmap, which has talked about how they're going to try and encourage investment, encourage innovation into the UK. That combined with an industrial strategy as we look at manufacturing and how we bolster that in the UK and strengthen it even further. I think it's quite a decent time to be investing. I have to say, my Irish colleagues have stolen all of some of our favourite reliefs. They talked about R&D. We also have that in the UK. I feel like it's a bit of a pitch here, or a bit of a Dragon's Den pitch. We have R&D, which is still one of our most generous ones. I noticed they call theirs the knowledge box. We have a patent box relief, which also gives a 10% rate. So I think it's really interesting that a lot of countries are bringing in very similar rules and reliefs that are available. And I think that's interesting as we now move towards a more global way of working and a global rate of taxation, as Brendan suggested, with BEPS and minimum rates of tax, etc. So I think the UK is still quite a generous regime to have. Investing into the UK can be done in a number of ways. You can have a branch where you can just literally set up an operation and carry on, and that's relatively easy to set up. And you can also have a limited company. There are advantages and disadvantages to both. Matt in particular will probably favour a corporate, as we'll go on to, because there's probably more generous reliefs there if you are capital intensive and want better reliefs. And Alison, you may kind of comment on the VAT, maybe fairly agnostic either way, I'm not sure. But I think from a registration point of view, our registration systems are relatively straightforward. They can take a little bit of time, I'm not going to lie. I think we share the pain of our Irish colleagues there in terms of registration times and how long that takes to set up. But with a headline rate of 25%, I think, on corporation tax, I think that probably puts us as a little bit of a disadvantage compared to Ireland. We do have a lower rate at 19, but it is very small. It's for profits over 50,000, 50,000 under, sorry. Anything over than that, your minimum rate is 25, with a sliding scale. So we're not probably as generous on the corporation tax front, but hopefully some of the reliefs we've got on capital allowances, which I'll throw to Matt soon, can help kind of chip away at that. We do have quite a regulated system from a governance perspective, I would say, in the UK, if I'm thinking about disadvantages. We do have a lot of extra governance around corporate criminal offence and transfer pricing. That's really topical at the moment, transfer pricing, in terms of documentation and how we decide what an arm's length rate is. And we have quite a few consultation documents on that at the moment, in terms of being able to hopefully make the UK a little bit more competitive in that respect. And I think there's very much a steer towards that as we look again towards a more international way of working. Matt, have I missed anything? Or Alison? I guess it's probably a whistle-stop tour, but I feel like our Irish colleagues have stolen most of our favourite kind of reliefs, and it's making it hard for us to differentiate ourselves, I suppose, in a way.
I think that's everything, or the bulk of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things, maybe the one thing we can take is our international network, right, in terms of our tax treaties. They mentioned that they've got about 75. Brendan, I'm being doing this wholly tongue-in-cheek, so bear with me. The UK still does have one of the biggest networks of tax treaties at about 130 countries, and that's probably one of our biggest sells. And thank goodness, really, following our departure from the EU, it's in a way it's a good thing those treaties were already in place for us to fall back on and rely on, because in many ways we use the EU royalties and directives, kind of a number of the directives, really quite extensively. But luckily, because the treaties were already in place and had been negotiated to fairly low rates, that is quite handy. So I would say from an international perspective, having those treaties available really is key, particularly around things like interest for financing and debt financing. I think it's still quite an attractive place to be. So maybe Matt, can I kind of throw it to you for our capital allowances, because we're in a good place in terms of the government's attempt to try and encourage investment, right, and kind of improve, as we've seen productivity weaken and not really move forward. There's been a real drive through capital investment, and that's really been heralded as one of the ways of trying to improve the economy and get the economy growing again, is through investment. And hopefully capital allowances is quite a good way to do that.
Yeah, so we periodically had a super deduction where the rate went from 100% of your capital expenditure being allowable to being gifted 130%, which was very quickly phased out when a lot of inbound investment occurred. So we're now back to the 100%. And if we go to the next slide, there's a brief analysis. So the UK, as Bev's just said there, has an incentive to invest. We don't have the most lucrative corporate tax rate. So in order to get those inbound investments, we need to make sure we've got a good regime in place that permits that. As with most places, deduction isn't allowable for any form of capital expenditure, and depreciations are always added back. So the government introduced a capital allowances regime after the First World War to encourage investment, and it's deviated quite a lot over the years. With rates up and down, and the regime is actually quite similar globally. So there is a lot of similarities, but also a lot of differences. So it's similar in its base to the capital cost allowance in Canada, but then follows more of the cost segregation side of it, which you see in the US. If we pop across to the next slide, this is a brief summary of some of the rates that are available. So the way UK tax law permits deductions, it's split between main pool plant and machinery and special rate plant and machinery. So your main pool is your generic furnishings, fixtures, fittings, any equipment. Then your manufacturing equipment, your plant. And because of the nature of tax law, we don't actually have a set definition for plant, and there is nothing that is specific in the legislation or guidance. So we run through a series of different tests to work it out. So it's very subjective. It is very much based on a case-by-case basis as to what would qualify for capital allowances and what wouldn't. So if you would fall into the main pool, you're eligible for first-year allowances if you meet a set of complicated criteria, such as being a corporate and you're not operating a leasing business, or the list is quite extensive. But your first year allowance essentially gives you that 100% deduction for the cost in the year of expenditure. If you don't meet the criteria for being main pool, you would fall into a special rate pool. A special rate pool tends to be your things such as your integral features. So if you flipped a building upside down and shook it, the bits that don't fall out would generally be depreciated at a much lower rate. So in the UK, that attracts a 6% writing down allowance. If you are a corporate and you meet another different list of criteria, you are eligible for a special rate deduction. So that permits a 50% deduction in the year of expenditure, and the rest just sits in a pool and is written down at 6% year on year. So as I just said, with the first year allowances, so where it qualifies for main pool plant and machinery, if for some reason you can't obtain the first year allowance, so it was purchased in an earlier year and not accounted for, or it wasn't new, then you can get the main pool plant and machinery rate, which is 18% a year. And this, again, it's all pooled and it's written down on a depreciating basis, 18%. The government also provide an annual investment allowance. So we currently have this set to 1 million, although different governments change this on a recurring basis. And given the requirement for an inbound investment at the moment, I can't see this dropping. We would hope it stays the same. So that's currently set at 1 million, and that just means that your first £1 million of expenditure is fully, you can claim essentially a first year allowance to that value in your year of expenditure, which you can then tie in with other reliefs as well. So if you've had the special rate deduction and obtained 50%, you can then use your annual investment allowance to set that against the other 50%. We also have other regimes such as land remediation. So if you've acquired a site in a contaminated state, you will receive a 150% tax deduction for the costs of remediating that site and bringing it back into use. And those costs can be anything from fly tipping, removing that, to removal of asbestos or ground gases and naturally occurring hydrocarbons in the ground. So we see it a lot with old petrol stations or gas stations and processing, a lot of old builders merchants. So there's a lot of different sites that have been brought back into use now that historically wouldn't have been viable. And I think that's the main ways at the moment. Is there anything you want to add there, Bev?
I think what's interesting is the fact that obviously the annual investment allowance, we've seen that increase quite dramatically, haven't we, in recent years? And I think for me, when we talk to inbounds and we talk to kind of businesses who are looking to set up in the UK, this probably is one of the biggest considerations, I think, because the instinct is to maybe set up as a branch because it's probably simpler. I think the compliance obligations are probably a little less than a corporate. But having said that, if you're a capital intensive business and you are going, typically your spend, particularly on capital, is going to be in those first few years, isn't it? That's where the majority of it's going to be if you're creating a manufacturing site or even just a warehouse or something along those lines. So the choice of vehicle you have, or, it's a vehicle entity, I suppose the best word to use, is really critical, isn't it, to make sure that you're maximising those reliefs?
Yeah, a lot of particularly the enhanced regime, so the first year allowances are only eligible for corporates. So if you've set up a mixed partnership or any form of partnership, it's only the corporate entities of those which qualify.
Yeah, and what about like branches? If you had like you've got an overseas parent, but you're almost dipping your toe in the water in the UK, and you maybe do it as a branch.
Yeah, that you wouldn't get the first year allowances, but you'd still be able to claim other reliefs if you were paying tax in the UK.
So it's kind of working out that model, isn't it, of what gives you the best position, I suppose. And I think that's really important. I'm a big believer in modelling and kind of forecasting forward and trying to work out where you're going to end up, because I think you have to know what's coming down the road to be able to kind of model that out, and you have to look at everything in the round. And Alison will probably tell us the same with VAT. It's that you have to know what rates are going to hit, and therefore what gives you the most flexibility going forwards. And you have to have your crystal ball a little bit. But if you have a model, you can scenario plan for that, can't you? I think where we are with not just the UK government, but obviously we've seen Ireland, as our colleagues have mentioned, there's changes occurring there as everybody's trying to kind of stimulate economies and stimulate growth and productivity. You need to be able to adjust quite quickly. You've got to be agile at the moment, more so than ever, I would say. And having those models available so that you can do that is really critical.
Yeah.
That's great. Shall we go on to VAT then,
yes,
guys?
Please.
Yes.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm going to talk to you about the practicalities of doing business in the UK as far as VAT is concerned and customs duty. I work very closely with both my Netherlands colleagues and my Irish colleagues, and we do a lot of business together because, of course, in today's world, business is very much international, and international supply chains are what we deal with. So if we think about, Bev and Matt were just talking about entities and whether or not I need to set up an entity, and talking about being agile. I wanted to look at maybe where you don't need to set up an entity as well, because for VAT registration, there's a nil threshold for any overseas business that's making taxable supplies in the UK. So you don't actually need to be established to do that. You don't need a branch or an entity. It may be that you just want to be agile in your supply chain and you're just merely selling goods to your UK market and you need to import them, or maybe you're selling goods and you've got a European market, but you've got a warehousing facility in the UK, so you're going to bring the goods into the UK first. So the key thing for you to be aware of there is, if you're importing goods which are going to be sold or leased on into the UK and you're the importer of those goods, you have to register for VAT. There's no threshold, there's no choice, it's absolutely mandatory. Very similar to Ireland, can take quite a few weeks to get sorted. And that's an important factor if you're thinking, if you've got goods on the water that are going to be coming into the UK, because you also need to have an EORI number, which allows you to be able to, is a key number similar to your VAT number, but you have to apply for it to be able to actually physically import goods. So if you're thinking of importing, please bear in mind VAT registration and an EORI number. That's for goods, which is quite straightforward and mandatory. For services, if you're supplying services, then we do start to look at whether or not you're established, because it may be that you're in Canada, say you're an accountant in Canada, you're going to supply services to me as a business in the UK. You would not need to register for that. You just supply your services from Canada. I deal with that inbound VAT. Where you will be required to register for that, bear in mind if you are working on, say, land-related services, maybe you've got a supply and install contract in the UK, that would mean a registration. Also things like admission to events. And if you're supplying electronic services, business to consumer, then a VAT registration will be in point. We have 3 key rates of VAT in the UK. 20% is our standard rate. That's where we are better than Ireland. They're a little bit higher than us. So we've got that to offer. We've got 5% reduced VAT rate and 0% on lots of different food items and new residential charity buildings, construction services relating to those. So some very valuable zero rates that we have. It's quarterly VAT returns in the UK. Work on about 8 weeks to register. You may, I think, as Brendan said, all governments now are very protective against sort of VAT fraud. So there's often a lot of questions asked. And as I mentioned before, you need an EORI number to import your goods. You will need an indirect customs rep if you're not established. That can be one of the trickiest things to get. You don't need a fiscal or a tax rep, unlike lots of other countries. So if we flick to the next stage, next slide, please, Sean, then I wanted to just talk about supply chains because you're in Canada. Brexit's been a massive thing over here, and it's really, I have to say, personally, hit the UK. And we deal with a lot of supply chain issues now post-Brexit with all our colleagues who are on the calls today. And that might be, you may have, as I said, you may want to import your goods for resale for your European markets. You might have always held it in the UK in the past, and obviously you can still do that. That would be an import into the UK and then an export out of the UK into mainland Europe. And you've got to be careful. Again, Brendan mentioned tariffs. Tariffs are obviously a big thing post-Brexit, and we have quite complicated rules about rules of origin as to whether or not they would meet the free trade agreement. And when there was all the Trump tariffs recently, and United Kingdom got a relatively good deal agreed initially, then there was a lot of talk around, well, what if I send all my goods to the UK first and then into the US? But you've got to bear in mind that we have these rules of origin for free trade between the EU and the UK, and that's very much reliant on goods being manufactured in either Europe or the UK, or mainly so. So we're seeing a lot of supply chains, and I'm sure Mark from the Netherlands will discuss this, or mention it in his speech, that we see a lot. We work a lot with the Netherlands, where we're going into mainland Europe. We'll have a 3PL warehouse, maybe move the goods in direct if they're coming far east into Rotterdam. That's always a good place, and the Netherlands have good regimes. So just to bear in mind that don't be aware of double duty, know what your tariff rate is, be aware of the UK-EU free trade agreement and rules of origin, be aware that anything that's moving goods into or out of a country, into the UK and then into Europe, will have VAT compliance to deal with. Next slide, please, Sean. Pretty much just again highlighting supply chains. Once your goods are in Europe, if you have it in one hub and move from there, it cuts down on your VAT compliance. And I don't want to cut across Mark's speech, so I won't say much more about trading. But once you're in Europe, then we cover a whole different regime. Next slide, and I think my final slide. Yeah, again, there's a lot going on in Europe, and that's to do with VAT in the digital age, and e-invoicing is coming in. Not only is it coming in Europe, it's also there's a consultation in the UK. So if you're looking to do business in these countries and get established, e-invoicing and being able to introduce it and use the systems and report directly with using the right standard invoices and documents is going to be a really big thing over the next 5 years. So please do have that on your risk register wherever you're thinking of doing business in Europe. I'm now going to pass over to my colleagues in the Netherlands, and thank you for listening.
Yes, thank you very much, Alison, for handing over to us. And we will certainly also speak about the post-Brexit trading from a Dutch perspective, and specifically from a Rotterdam perspective, where we are today. So welcome, everyone. Good morning to you. I hope you're still there. In the next 15 to 20 minutes, we will give a brief presentation about why the Netherlands. And it is a very nice sunny picture of Rotterdam. It's very rarely this nice weather. but certainly a nice picture. In our update, we will first give a general introduction about the Dutch business climate here in the Netherlands, and then focus a little bit on investment structures and some direct and indirect tax aspects. But we certainly appreciate it's your Monday morning and will not make it a tax technical presentation. Don't worry for that. Before we start, let me introduce the team. And Mark, let us start with you so we can also test if the technique is working properly on your end.
Thank you very much, guys, and good morning to all. I am a Market International VT Manager from the Netherlands, and I assist a lot of companies with VT matters related to trading across the globe. I'm happy to talk about that further on in this presentation.
Perfect. Thank you, Mark. And Oscar, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, good morning to you all. I'm Oscar Zegler, working as an international tax advisor for the Rotterdam office of Baker Tilly in the Netherlands.
Thank you, Oscar. And my name is Gijs Vibbe, tax partner in the Netherlands, heading the tax practice in the Rotterdam office, and also working closely together with quite a lot of colleagues in the international Baker Tilly network. So let's start with the first part. First, a general part about the business climate in the Netherlands and the trade relation we have with Canada. The Netherlands is Canada's 13th largest global trading partner overall, which is of course not the biggest, but certainly also not the smallest trading partner of Canada. Last year, 2024, numbers illustrate that Canada exports to the Netherlands about 7.1 Canadian dollar billion, and vice versa, Canada imported about 4.6 billion Canadian dollar from the Netherlands in the same year. So I think the Netherlands runs a small trade deficit with Canada, but don't worry, Netherlands will never introduce tariffs like the US. That's not really far, but Mark will speak about it in more detail in a minute. Very interestingly, there are about more than 1 million Dutch Canadians in Canada, and almost 3.23% of the population, and that of course has to do with the strong historical relation we have between both countries, and a lot of Dutch emigrated after World War II to Canada, and I think on the 5th of May we have our Liberation Day, and if I'm not mistaken, Canada has the Dutch Heritage Day, and also very interesting, I found that Netherlands of course is known among others for its tulips, and I saw that in Ottawa every year the biggest tulip festival of the whole world is organized, I think with some help from the Dutch tulips imported to Canada. The important Dutch exports to Canada include machinery, chemicals, food and agri products, high-tech equipment, and the Canadian export to the Netherlands include mineral fuels, wood products, agriculture goods, seafood and raw materials. And one important aspect of the Dutch investment climate is Schiphol Airport and the Rotterdam Port, which we will speak about in a bit more detail in a minute. Moving on to the next slide. The Dutch investment climate is very much a broad business environment, among others due to its strategic location in the EU and a strong infrastructure. We are a very small country, so very much dependent on international trade, and that also illustrates our business climate that we have here in the Netherlands. To start with, the Netherlands has a very strategic location in Europe, among others due to the largest seaport in Europe in Rotterdam, Schiphol Airport. And because of that, the Netherlands is very often used also as a gateway to wider Europe. In the Netherlands, the workforce is relatively highly skilled. Almost everyone speaks English, which is of course a necessity if you want to be involved in international business. We have a very innovative and knowledge-based economy, and that is also illustrated by supportive policies by our government that supports that, also by specific innovative regions in the Netherlands, among others Eindhoven Brainport, but also other areas in Netherlands. And last but not least, Netherlands has a reliable, stable and transparent legal system, which is of course very important for investors when it comes to asset protection of intellectual property. Moving to the next slide, some words specifically about the harbor in Rotterdam. And Sean, if you can click a few items more, then we will see some. Yes, thank you. Also, I myself are now in the Rotterdam office, and Rotterdam is the largest seaport in Europe, which is also one of the main reasons that the Netherlands is used as a gateway to the rest of Europe, and that is also an important reason why the Netherlands is the fourth largest exporter worldwide. As Alison just mentioned, the Netherlands is the #1 post-Brexit location for UK businesses that, after the Brexit, want to avoid customs, administrative procedures, etc. But Alison and Mark can explain that much better than myself. But it's an important feature to know as well. I think we'll move on to the next slide.
Yeah.
Oscar.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
I would like to start with the key sectors which might be interesting to invest in from a Canadian perspective. We have a lot of industry in the Netherlands. Just like Gijs mentioned, we have the big port here in Rotterdam with a lot of chemical factories and a lot of businesses surrounding it. We have in the south of the Netherlands the high-tech industry with the biggest chip machine maker in the world. Maybe you've heard of it, ASML. Very a lot of investment opportunities there. We have secondly the energy sector. The Netherlands used to be a big gas producer, but since earthquake occurred, we are not allowed to. They shut down the extraction of those gas fields. But there's still a lot of infrastructure there, so we try to be the gas hub of Europe for trading gas, but also we use that infrastructure for investments in hydrogen and other carbon neutral energies for transporting wind energy and solar energy as well. And the third key sector would be agriculture. In the Netherlands, we have a lot of agriculture. And in the eastern part of the country, we have the food valley, and there a lot of innovation takes place there between the university there and also a lot of companies surrounding that university, especially for food products, food processing, and agriculture. But the last key sector, like Gijs already mentioned, is actually the transport sector. Because of the port in Rotterdam, it's considered to be the gateway of Europe, but we also have a lot of water here in the Netherlands. So we have inland shipping routes to Belgium, to Germany, and further on to the middle of Europe, but also very good roads and rail connections to foreign countries in Europe. On to the next slide, please. And then I would like to say something about the political and macroeconomic overview. The Netherlands has a GDP of around 1 trillion euros. That's half of the size of Canada. Like Ireland, we also have a very low unemployment rate of around 4%, which also can be a little bit tough to hire employees because of the low employment rate. We have quite a stable political system. We have mainly more than 3 parties forming the government, which makes it quite a balanced political system here in the Netherlands. We also have some challenges in the Netherlands, and that is the energy transition we undergo, because we're not a gas producer anymore, so we have to import fossil fuels. So the energy rates are quite high in the Netherlands. And we have an issue of nitrogen here in the air, which makes it hard to get a permit to build houses, roads, factories, etc. Then onto the legal framework in the Netherlands. If you would like to start a business in the Netherlands, it's very easy to use your Canadian company, for example. You can start your activities in the Netherlands very quickly. Only the registration with the Dutch Chamber of Commerce and the Dutch tax authorities is necessary. Registration in the Dutch Chamber of Commerce lasts around 1 week. With the tax authorities a little bit longer, but you can start almost immediately. If you decide to incorporate a Dutch subsidiary, you can do that in the form of a Dutch BV. It's quite common actually, but other options are also possible, like a partnership, which is a little bit less common, but can make sense if you like to set up a joint venture with another Dutch or foreign company. We have strong IP protection rules in the Netherlands, as we are part of the European Union. So other incentives and rules from the European Union are applicable in the Netherlands as well. And one important thing to mention is that there are no restrictions on foreign ownership in the Netherlands, especially not from Canada. And it's very easy to repatriate capital which you invested in the Netherlands or profits. You can always distribute it back to Canada. Then in the tax system in the Netherlands, we have an income tax rate of 90% profits up to 200,000 euros, and everything above is taxed against a rate of 25.8%. We have an extensive treaty network as well, with around 90 countries. And of course, as we are part of the European Union, we have a free trade agreement with Canada to mitigate import tariffs, etc. And another tax incentive is the 30% ruling. If you decide, for example, to send over employees to the Netherlands as expats, you can reimburse 30% for salary tax-free for the upcoming 5 years. Going to change a little bit in the as of 2026, they intend to decrease the percentage to 27% instead of 30%. Our VAT rates, Mark will discuss with you there, but they're at just a 21 rate for standard services and products, and a reduced rate of 9%. Tax incentives. So we have in an IP box as well, and profits in that IP box get taxed at a rate of 9%. And we also have an exemption or a credit for wage taxes, up to 40% of the wage tax to be paid for employees who are busy with R&D activities. Furthermore, we have some green energy subsidies in the form of investment deduction allowances, which mitigate the corporate income tax in the Netherlands. Then we see on the next slide the corporate income tax rate in the Netherlands for the past years. It's always been the maximum rate around 25%, and the lowest rate up to 200,000 euros around 20%. And our expectations are that it will remain the same in the coming years. Then we draw a small structure on the next slide. If you decide to invest in the Netherlands through a Dutch subsidiary, you see a Canadian entity, below that a Dutch company, which is going to perform the activities in the Netherlands. If the company has profits, can distribute the profits to Canada without the withholding of dividends or withholding taxes. If the Dutch company is financed, for example, by loans, there is no withholding tax on interest in the Netherlands. And the same applies for royalties. If you decide to have other investments in, for example, in other European countries, you also can use the Dutch entity as a holdco, a holding company, because of the treaty network. Based on the tax treaties, interest and withholding tax and relative withholding tax is most of the time mitigated. And in the Netherlands, we have a participation exemption, which means if the Dutch co receive dividends from other entities, other foreign entities, it will be tax exempt in the Netherlands.
Yeah, so I mean, this is a very tax efficient holding structure. If you envisage to set up a business either in the Netherlands or in Europe, because it basically allows you to repatriate any profits within Europe on the application of the treaties, tax treaties with the Netherlands or the European subsidiaries that the Netherlands can use. So it allows to repatriate profits from any European country to the Netherlands without any tax leakage. And subsequently, if you repatriate profits from the Netherlands to Canada, like also said, also allows you to do that without any tax leakage. Of course, if you do this for to acquire or set up a business in another country than the Netherlands, also in the Netherlands, you have to safeguard the substance of this Dutch co, similar like Brendan just mentioned for Ireland. But if you can manage the substance, this is as tax efficient as it gets, because there is simply no tax leakage on any repatriation there.
Okay. On the next slide, there's a summary of the corporate income tax highlights. I want to take out two, because if you have startup losses in the Netherlands, for example, you can offset these losses for an indefinite amount of time. Once you get profits, you can offset these losses. And the second thing is that the Dutch tax authorities are quite cooperative. So it's always possible to get an advanced tax ruling with the Dutch tax authorities to get certainty up front for other tax transactions here in the Netherlands. I think then on to you, Mark, for the VAT topics.
Yes, thank you very much, Oscar. We often sell the Netherlands as gateway to Europe. And that's not only because we are really a trading country historically, but it's also due to our infrastructure. Gijs already mentioned it, but with Schiphol Airport and the Rotterdam Port, we are really suitable to collect large amounts of goods and onwards distribute them towards other EU countries. That's what we often do. We have a lot of logistics companies who can assist you with those kind of things. We have quite efficient customs authorities. It was already mentioned before, but in order to import goods into any EU country, and therefore also the Netherlands, you need a so-called AORI number. They have a beautiful process around it, and normally where it takes weeks to get something from the government, with the Dutch customs authorities, it will be set up in a couple of days. So that's how keen they are on trade. Furthermore, the Netherlands is of course part of the EU, and within the EU we have a free movement of goods. So you can send them from the Netherlands to each other EU country without having to re-import them constantly. Also, our tax authorities, they are also really keen on trade. You can actually talk to them. They give an opinion on whatever you need. When you VAT register in the Netherlands, you can already start trading without the VAT number being granted. So that's how proactive they really are on keeping the trade going via the Netherlands. Furthermore, the Dutch firm, as well as the UK firm and other firms, a very strong position within the Baker Tilly network. We often act as gateway to Europe and other Baker Tilly member firms as well, so that you have a single point of contact in case you would like to do business within the Baker Tilly network. And on the next slide, I will talk briefly about some cash flow benefits that the Dutch government has implemented from a VAT perspective. One of the biggest things we have is an import VAT deferment license. I will talk about that later. But furthermore, we have some VAT regimes in place to avoid that you lose cash for a temporary period, because nothing more annoying than to pay VAT, which you are entitled to refund, but you have to wait on it for several months or even several years because authorities want to look at it. Basically, if you're a Canadian company and you supply goods within the Netherlands to a Dutch company, there is a reverse charge mechanism applicable. That means that you don't need to charge Dutch VAT to your Dutch customer, but the Dutch customer instead will self-assess for the VAT and in the same VAT return also deduct it. So on balance, there's zero VAT due if they are entitled to it. So that really helps from a commercial perspective. Furthermore, when you use the Netherlands as gateway to Europe and you start shipping your goods out from the Netherlands to all the other EU countries, there is a 0% VAT rate in B2B trades from the Netherlands to all those countries. Furthermore, there's also a 0% rate for export supplies from the Netherlands in case you would have to send goods back to Canada, or in case you would like to send goods to another non-EU country. Be aware though that after import, and I'll touch that briefly later, that you pay import duties, and when you re-export it again, you will pay duties again. So it might be more efficient if you want to supply non-EU countries to do that directly from Canada, but all is possible, of course, from the Netherlands. And in case you're going to set up a Dutch entity or even trade from the Netherlands, which is perfectly possible without entity, on the most of the services you are going to buy from suppliers, there's also a reverse charge mechanism applicable, or it is even out of scope for EU VAT purposes, meaning that they will not charge any VAT. So you don't have to pre-finance that and then ask it back later from the Dutch tax authorities. So they're really keen on cash flow as well. And on the next slide, I'll talk briefly about compliance obligations. Next slide, please. Because for VAT purposes, we follow the flow of the goods, and the flow of the goods will determine your VAT obligations. And hence, it's very important to pick the country of import into the EU. Because in principle, when you are going to import goods into the European Union, you will trigger a VAT registration and a VAT reporting obligation. So you already can imagine that if you are going to import in different EU countries simultaneously, you will trigger a lot of VAT registrations and a lot of VAT compliance, which is absolutely not needed. Pick one EU country, and ideally the Netherlands. No, but jokes aside, pick one and start trading from there. So you avoid all those VAT registrations. Be in that regard also a bit keen on the Incoterms that you agree upon with your customers, because if there is a DDP Incoterm, so-called duty duly paid Incoterm, then you are obligated to import into the respective country. So be a bit aware of that. Furthermore, we have a beautiful system within the European Union called the One-Stop Shop. In case you would like to trade to consumers, all those B2C sales can be reported via one return instead of registering all across Europe. So basically, in a nutshell, you can register for VAT, you can register and already start trading without it being finalized, and you only need that one registration to trade throughout the European Union. You don't even need an entity. Of course, you can set one up if you like for other purposes, but it's not needing. Quarterly filings in principle for the VAT return and monthly filings for the EU sales listing. If you are in a VAT position where you would like to reclaim VAT from the Dutch tax authorities, we can also put you on a monthly VAT return, so you get back the VAT faster. And then on the last slide, I would like to talk about a beautiful scheme that we have in the Netherlands. It's called an import VAT deferment license. And normally when you import goods into the Netherlands coming from Canada or from any non-EU country, you have to pay import VAT and import duties. Those import duties will always be a cost. You cannot reclaim them, so be a bit careful where you are going to import. We do have in the Netherlands a so-called bonded warehouse, where you can put your goods in and then they are not yet imported. So in case you would like to distribute from the Netherlands to, for example, the UK or other close non-EU countries such as Switzerland or Norway, you can use that bonded warehouse and goods are not yet imported, and then you can ship them onwards from them and only pay duties once. But with the import VAT deferment license, you don't immediately pay the import VAT upon import. Instead, you can declare the VAT in your VAT return. And that's a huge benefit because in the same VAT return, you can also reclaim or deduct your self-declared VAT. So on balance, with such a license, you pay no import VAT. And it often takes between 4 to 6 months before you get your money back. If you import into large quantities, because you would like to set up your business in the European Union, that would be very beneficial. You do need a VAT fiscal representative in order to get such a license, as you are not a Dutch established business if you want to trade via your Canadian company. But then you need one, and Baker Tilly Netherlands offers such services, so we can help you on all those fronts. So really our VAT and customs system is there to help you trading, do it efficiently, and create the least amount of compliance as possible. That was it in a nutshell from a VAT perspective. I would like to give guys the final word.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. And on our last slide, our contact details, and of course, we're happy to answer any questions if there are on this session of Mark, Oscar, myself. And if not, please feel free to address any questions also after this presentation to us. And here are our contact details on the slide. So I think with that, Sean, we will conclude. Well, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Fantastic. And I'll check if there's any Q&A. I don't see any questions now, but that doesn't mean they won't, filter in over the next little while, or it's just a testament to how well you presented your countries along the way. The biggest thing that we've touched on in maybe other presentations, and maybe the various countries want to touch on it one by one. And I know specifically for the Netherlands and Ireland, the concept of full employment versus versus the high skilled economy. Is there also is there the opportunity to bring people along from Canada? So if we're to set up business in the various countries, is there a restriction to how many people we can bring? Are there visa requirements? Is there an amount of time that they need to be aware of from a tax perspective, where all of a sudden they're caught in somebody else's tax net? And we'll follow sort of the same sequence: the Ireland, UK, Netherlands process there. If we just have that one quickly, and then I think we can bring Darla on and she can ask any last questions and then wrap it up. Or maybe we'll start with the UK if somebody doesn't mind on that one. Just
sure. I mean, just from a UK perspective, obviously there likely are to be visa restrictions that would need to be worked through. We have a HR department within MHA who are client facing, who help in that respect and would help navigate that position. From a tax perspective, there are certain rules where you can be here for a certain period of time before you are subject to UK tax, particularly where you're coming in for an inbound to spend a period of time. So the UK rules are quite complex for people coming over from overseas. So it's one to think about in advance before you arrive, so that your employees know what they need to look out for, and also if you need to do any kind of balancing exercise in terms of the tax they'd suffer in the UK versus in Canada, and how those equalisation payments might work
Thank you. And from the Netherlands?
Yeah, Sean, happy to comment on that. And I think in principle, there are no restrictions for Canadians to come and work and live in the Netherlands. You do need a working permit, but it's relatively easy to get for a Canadian. And in general, the Netherlands is a very open economy, certainly does welcome knowledge immigrants. And actually, we even have a tax facility for that to attract them to the Netherlands. So you just mentioned that already.
Yeah, it's just the 30% ruling I just mentioned. You can, as a company, as a Canadian company, you can reimburse your employees 30% of the salary tax exempt for the upcoming 5 years, which is quite an advantage if you send over employees to the Netherlands.
Yeah, as Dutch employees, we're always a bit jealous on those people because they get a huge tax benefit on their salary, which I think the background of this facility is that they also make additional costs for moving house to the Netherlands, etc. But it's such a huge benefit that actually the people that come to the Netherlands and make use of it really experience it as a huge tax benefit.
Fantastic. Are you guys hiring by any chance?
Maybe you can come to the Netherlands, Sean, and go for big.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, guys. I will team, and I will flip it over to Darla for any final questions and maybe some closing remarks.
I just have one question, if it's possible, from each group. Tell us about any surprises. Is there maybe, I'd say, what is the biggest challenge a company from outside of Europe coming in to do business is? The one thing that kind of comes to mind right away, or any surprises we should be aware of? Is there any time you've worked with a client where we were, as a client, shocked? Oh my gosh, I had no idea we could do this, couldn't do that. The culture side of things. Any last minute advice you'd like to give at the end, or share any challenge that we should be aware of, or don't be surprised if? I'd love that last little tidbit if possible.
Who do you want? Is it to Netherlands, Darla, or?
All three of you, yes, please.
Shall I kick off for Netherlands? So
Sure.
Surprises. Also just in a few seconds to discuss what is actually in practice a surprise for a foreign business, like a Canadian company doing business in the Netherlands. And one of the things, if we have to mention surprises, for example, banking. You would say if you come to the Netherlands, have a company here, opening a bank account is the least of your worries. But in practice, actually, with the whole KYC, etc., it can be a bit burdensome, and nowadays actually does take a bit of time. So we do warn people, start timely with that. And in our local cities, we have, say, local governmental organizations like Amsterdam Partners, Rotterdam Partners, that facilitate foreign businesses doing businesses in those cities, for example, by looking for housing, warehouse, but also connecting them to the local banking people to start these kind of processes, and visa as well. So Darla, if I have to mention one thing, maybe this is a practical tip to keep in mind.
Thank you.
I would echo that from the UK, actually. I think that is quite surprising to us often, is that how long it can take to set up a UK bank account. And they are needed in terms of, where you've got, if you're a UK resident, it's relatively straightforward. But I would say inbounds, they do find it quite a challenge and takes quite a long time. And it's needed for so many things. With other tax registrations, you do need the UK bank account. So I'd echo that. That is actually really challenging, and what should be a relatively straightforward process. I think the other thing is VAT. It feels like apologies for my Netherlands colleagues on the call, and luckily my UK VAT colleague has left, because it should be, in theory, what is quite a relatively straightforward tax. but it's actually the one that you can miss and get wrong very quickly, very easily. And it's often your first taster of the UK tax system, because you will find that most inbounds will import goods or do something in the UK where VAT will hit before you even have any kind of presence for corporation tax or PAYE. But they almost don't realise they've triggered that, like Alison said, where there's no threshold. And you don't really realise you've triggered that liability until sometimes many months down the line, by which point you're already in that kind of system, and it's a bit of a chore to try and untrigger it a little bit, to kind of unravel it. So I'd say VAT is probably one that catches people out the most, I would say.
Yeah, definitely, Beverly. To quickly comment on that, the moment you're going to ship goods somewhere to some country, you trigger VAT obligations, whether it's the UK or any EU country. So that's really good to take into account when setting up your supply chain.
And
before
it's
you get
so
a
easy,
surprise
isn't
for
it?
something
It's so easy because you want to be entrepreneurial and you want to do business, and you have to do business internationally now. That's the only real way to grow these days, is everybody's got to be more mindful of international is second nature to most people, but it's triggering those tax points as you enter the waters and enter the countries, right? It's really easy to overlook it innocently, really innocently.
Definitely, and certainly when you agreed onto certain terms and you're all of a sudden hit with 20 or 21% VAT and taken out of your margin, that's gonna hurt.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you. Excellent. I really appreciate. Mark, did you get a chance to speak? I'm not sure. Did we speak with all three?
Everybody's
Yes,
spoken.
definitely.
Okay, yes. Excellent.
Thank
Thank
you,
you so
Darla.
much. Thank you. So yeah, just to wrap it up real quick, the past 3 sessions we've had with Baker Tilly all over the world, I really find it's quite surprising to find out we're all kind of in the same boat. We're all kind of investing, looking at the future of opportunities, looking at building new partnerships. We're not just insulated in our own little countries trying to figure it out, but instead we've kind of opened these doors and have these opportunities, and we're all looking at building our own infrastructure, and we're looking at making our services and products stronger, supplying and shipping more local, but now also this ability to go kind of worldwide. So I can't thank you enough, Baker Tilly, for sharing the expertise with us. To our European friends, I am a Dutch woman, very proud, I must say. The Netherlands were there all of the time to visit, so kudos. And yeah, Europe is a wonderful, amazing place, so forward thinking and ahead. And I hate to say it, guys, in manufacturing, the Europeans do it so well. There's so much to learn from. So whether it's opening your own, partnering with somebody that's already there, creating those opportunities, I wish everybody the best of luck. And please, Baker Tilly will reach out afterwards with information and contact. I encourage the conversation to continue. I just, like I said, sat back and got to listen to everything, and wow, they do this, and wow, it's kind of a big eye opener for our end, and we couldn't have been able to do this without you. So kudos to the Baker Tilly team. And if there's anything we can do here in Canada, right, even in our rural areas, to be able to share best practices with your industries, the door is definitely open here as well. So thanks, Sean.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it, and have a wonderful day.